Hi, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 7, which is going to cover juveniles and gangs. So, gangs are a very unique group of frequently criminally affiliated organizations. And what makes it really unique is that they involve minors. And in fact, a lot of them revolve around minors. Now, they can bleed into the ages of above 18. Typically, you don't see a whole lot of people over the age of 27 engaged in gangs. It's sort of something that people age out of, but we're going to focus on the minor end of it at this point. So gangs have always existed, but there's increasing law enforcement attention to gangs for a number of reasons. And there's four main reasons, and that's going to be that gangs are now proliferating beyond the cities into suburban areas and into rural areas, whereas once upon a time they were just limited to urban locations. There's an increased level of physical violence within gangs. There's an increase in the amount of firearms violence that we see coming from gangs and gang members. And finally, the role of drugs in gangs and drug trafficking. So, drug trafficking is a really common element of gangs that has been on the increase. So the first question that is always, sort of it's this nebulous concept of a gang. What is a gang? How do you define it? Is it five people? Is it 25 people? Is it, what are the rules? What are the boundaries here? And it's always been really hard to define, and there's always been different working definitions. But this is the one that we're going to go with. And that is that a gang is a group of persons, youthful persons, working together towards unlawful ends with a high adolescent component, meaning that there's a lot of people in there that are involved who are under the age of 18. It also there's a lot of gray area. There aren't hard lines and hard definitions around a lot of things related to gangs. And one of those things is going to be, how do you become a gang member? There's not one hard set, fast set of rules and criteria for gang affiliation. So it's often hard to distinguish between people who are full blown gang members, who actively participate, who have hierarchy positions in the gang, versus wannabes or hanger ons, who are people who, hang out with them, they follow them, they party with them, but they don't take part in gang activities. They're not actually in the gang. So the main way we try to distinguish between the people who are, the posers versus the actual gang members are going to be a couple of ways. So first we have self-proclamation. So people will literally, say, I am a member of MS-13, or I am a member of fill in the blank. Gang tattoos is a big one. If there's, gang tattoos on an individual's person, that is a very strong and legitimate indicator of gang affiliation. And then wearing colors and doing all three of these things together. So the proclamation, having the gang tattoos, wearing the colors. Gangs have specific colors. They have specific symbols. We're going to talk about those a little bit more here in the near future. But that is really how we identify what is typically very difficult to identify in terms of specific criteria. So a big question is, why do kids join gangs? And there's a number of reasons, but first and foremost, there's two really big ones. And one is going to be peer association, meaning that they already have friends who are involved in the gang and those friends pull them in, or they're hungry for peer association. They're hungry for a group of friends. They haven't really found their niche or their spot socially yet, and gangs offer that outlet. And number three, which might even be like the heaviest hitter, I think, is that lack of familial support in the home. Right. So that they don't feel as though their familial needs, their emotional support needs are getting met at home because either, mom and dad aren't around enough because they work too much, or it's a single parent household, or one or more parents are incarcerated. So they feel like they're not getting that familial element, and they think that they're going to find it. In fact, gangs will often promise them that they will find it, that we will be your family. We will take care of you. We will look after you. Other reasons include obtaining money through illegal means. It's a way for young people to obtain notably larger amounts than just working a minimum wage job. And another big driving factor is, if an area is rife with gang violence, joining a gang gives you protection from other gangs in the area. If it's an area where there's a lot of gang activity and you are not affiliated, you are vulnerable to violence from all of them. Versus if you join one, then you have a group that is actively looking to protect you and to battle on your behalf should that moment arise. So once again, we get back to this nebulous, difficult, hard to define issue regarding gangs. And one of those issues is gang-related violence. How do we define gang-related violence? And again, it's not an easy thing to do. So if you're a member of a gang and you break a law, is that gang-related violence because you broke the law, you engaged in assault, or is that you, the individual, just engaging in an assault? So it becomes really hard for us to codify, which means collecting clear data to measure and to research becomes difficult, because how do you define the variables? Okay, so gangs are actively trafficking in narcotics in a big way, and they are engaged in premeditated violence. Will often target people under the age of 18 to recruit them into their gangs. Why? Because people under the age of 18, when arrested, get notably less stringent legal consequences. As we've been through the class, you know that there's a wide array of what can happen when somebody's arrested under the age of 18 for trafficking drugs. And it's not going to be nearly as hard as if you are over 18 and you are arrested into the adult system. So gangs will often look to recruit people who are still legally minors to be their drug runners, be their drug traffickers, and bring them, move the product, bring the money back. Because if they get busted, and eventually everybody does, eventually, if you're running a gang that's narcotics trafficking, there's a certain percentage of your runners that are just going to get arrested. That's a reality. So they want younger people, because therefore the sanctions are lighter. Those kids are more likely to be turned back out of the system so that they can get back to work with minimal consequences. There's a really great book out there if you ever have the time or the inclination about this. It's called Cocaine Kids, and it's where the author of the book interviews the head of the gang, and literally the head of the gang has these kids, these adolescent kids, running cocaine for him, and it gives you a really in-depth look into this real life experience. So it's one I recommend. There are multiple types of gangs, so let's define different types of gangs. And we're going to start with the hedonistic gang. And the hedonistic gang is going to be any gang that has very low engagement in violence or violent activity. Excuse me. And their organization typically revolves around drug use, partying, and they rarely, if ever, engage in violence. Next, we're going to move on to defining instrumental gangs. And instrumental gangs are going to be primarily involved in things like burglary, property thefts, theft of any kind, auto theft. They don't often engage in drug use or drug trafficking, and they only infrequently engage in violence. So the focus of this kind of a gang, this instrumental gang, is literally engaging in crime for revenue and to bring in money. Next are predatory gangs, and this is going to be the archetype, the example that when somebody says the word gang, this is what everybody is going to think of. It's your knee-jerk reaction. And these are going to be the groups that are actively involved in serious crime like robbery. There's going to be heavy drug trafficking, heavy drug use. And this is what we think of when people talk about gangs in the news, or when we talk about gang intervention and gang violence. These are the groups that we think about. Gangs are very gender specific. Females are not allowed to join male gangs. However, females can create their own gangs. And historically, female gangs have always been created in support of male gangs. So females can't join gang membership, but they create their own group of female gangs where the bulk of the members of that female gang are typically the girlfriends or close friends of their corresponding male counterpart. They will often act on behalf of the male gang, so they will often hold the narcotics, hold the illegal firearms, etc., act as sort of like a way station for those sorts of issues, rather than the males having to be in possession of those items. It's not that females aren't a target for law enforcement, and this, my dog is in the room with me, sorry. It's not that they're not a target for law enforcement. It's not that law enforcement never, will pat them down or search them, but they will get searched and targeted less than their male counterparts, which is why the male gangs will often give those items over to their female version. But interestingly, we've seen in the past several decades that there are more and more female gangs that are rising that are completely unaffiliated to male gangs, that they're just completely autonomous on their own, female gangs that organize with no relationship to any other male gang, and they do things their own standalone entity. They're not a way station. They don't hold narcotics, illegal firearms, etc. for male gangs. It's completely autonomous. So that's sort of an interesting development that we've seen socially in the past decade or so with gangs. Gangs of any kind primarily communicate through graffiti. So tagging is another word for graffiti, and it's essentially leaving their mark, or it's challenging a rival gang for territory. They'll go into another gang's territory and they'll tag all over their symbols all over these buildings, and they're basically challenging another gang for that rival territory. It's also used, tagging is also a really common thing that is a memorial, or it's used in memoriam of gang members who have been deceased. Hand signs are another method of communication for gangs, where they flash hand signs that are meant to identify the affiliation of what gang they are with. We see that not only is this a form of self-proclamation and a form of communication, but it's also a form of challenge, if you will, that if rival gang members start flashing their own signs at one another, this often tends to escalate into physical violence. Colors are another method of communication. Each gang has their identifying colors and what they will wear or what they won't wear in to signify that affiliation. So example, the age-old, very famous, the Bloods gang obviously wears red. The Crips wear blue. Those are their rivals, etc. So what is law enforcement's response to gangs and with that focus on juvenile affiliation? So first of all, the first step they want to take is community organization, and you want to modify community relationships and resources in order to be able to offer options beyond gang affiliation. So if we have a gang that is, or multiple gangs proliferating in an urban area, we want other options. We want other options for places for kids to go, places for kids to gather. For kids who don't want to get into violence or into drugs, we need to have options. We need to present them with options if we want to intervene in that sort of flow into the gang affiliation. We also want organizational change and development. Organizations have to adapt their specific responses to specific gangs. So, for example, law enforcement agencies will devote entire sections, units, and individual officers to gang interdiction, where they will literally, their whole job is keeping up with what's going on in the gang. What are they doing? What is the focus? How has it changed today from a year ago? How does that change our response to intervening and preventing and responding to gang violence? There's also social intervention, and this is going to be outreach efforts to gang members that offer things like drug treatment or counseling, so that it gives them an option beyond what it is that the gang is taking part in. And there's suppression. Suppression is what you probably think of most when you think of gang interdiction, is that it is a formal method of social control, which means law enforcement. Law enforcement is stepping in, and they're utilizing arrest, and they're utilizing incarceration. They're using intelligence gathering. They're putting out aggressive patrol to identify known gang members, to keep tabs on what their activities are, and to respond as quickly as possible with arrests in order to suppress the gang activity. Gang sweeps are probably something that you've heard of before in the media, in the news, and that is a form of suppression, right? There's also prosecutorial efforts, and this is really interesting to me, that, prosecutors have started making wide use of the RICO statutes when trying to manage gangs and to dismantle gangs. And what RICO is the Racketeering, Influence, Corruption, and Organization Act. And this was specifically developed in the 1970s as a way to attack organized crime